Happy New Year to each and every one of you. This is the second session of the IHRS DM DNB teaching program. This is meant to supplement what good amount of teaching already goes on in your individual departments. We think that some of the departments probably do not have an active EP program. So I think this IHRS activity will definitely benefit or enthuse a lot of cardiology postgraduates in EP. We the plan is to keep it quite basic in the initial sessions so that all of you get a hang of the EP nomenclature, and then accordingly the only desire of mine is as a coordinator for this program is that it brings in quality and it remains time bound. So I do not want to spend much time over the introduction. This time I have invited what I call as the Kolkata group, and they will all introduce themselves. The moderators are very senior electrophysiologists from the country. Dr. Sudhanshu Dwivedi from Lucknow, Professor Dwivedi, hello. And Professor Dr. Raja Selvaraj from Pondicherry. I will hand over the proceedings to Professor Dwivedi that he takes on from here and engages the speakers in a good discussion. Professor Dwivedi, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashish. So, good morning to everybody. Today we are going to discuss something about pathways. And I am Dr. S.K. Dwivedi. I am working here as Professor of Cardiology in King George's Medical University, Lucknow. We have in UP, we have two EP centers. One is our college, another is CPGI. And we are catering for about a population of 22 crores. So that is what it is. So let us come straight to the atrioventricular reentrant tachycardia. It is a reentrant tachycardia, and reentrant circuit has two limbs. The AV node His-Purkinje system is one limb, and accessory pathway is the other limb. Accessory pathways are nothing but remnant excitable tissues connecting atria and ventricle around the both annulus, the left side as well as the right side. Majority of them for all practical purposes. Rarely they can connect atria to right ventricle or to his or AV node to right ventricle or to myocardium.
Good morning, sir.
Are rarity.
सर वो मैम को देखा था उनकी शुगर बस ज्यादा थी.
They are single, and most of the times they are left-sided. Septal are uncommon and right-sided are very uncommon. But one thing good about right-sided is that they are always manifest. Generally, they are always manifest. Now, this circuit is maintained because you all know that it is both these circuits will have different refractoriness and conduction times. And accessory pathway is typically very fast conducting, faster conducting than AV nodes. Now, majority of these pathways conduct both ways. 50% conduct only retrograde. That means they will not manifest antegradely. And 10% roughly will conduct only retrograde. So that brings two more terms. That is a manifest pathway. When AP conducts antegradely, then it will show delta wave. So that is known as a manifest pathway. Second is concealed pathway. When AP exclusively conducts retrogradely, I just said only 10 or 15% would be conducting only retrogradely, and their participation in the pathway is shown on EP or the manifestations on surface ECG rarely. So then a kind of AP is known as a bystander AP, which is present, but it is not a part of tachycardia circuit. For example, let's say the atrial fibrillation is going on and there is a pathway. So that will be a bystander. It is not participating critically in the circuit. And the term WPW syndrome should be reserved for an entity where there is manifestation of that is a manifest AP is there, along with reentrant tachyarrhythmia. So a combination of manifested AP with evidence of or events resulting into tachycardia should be labeled as WPW syndrome. that means a concealed AP, you cannot say that it is a WPW. Then there are two types of predominant tachycardia, the orthodromic AVRT and second is antidromic AVRT. Orthodromic means out of these two limbs, the antegrade limb is going to AV system and retrograde limb is accessory pathway. And majority of the tachycardias are like that. And then can be antidromic. So you can recall here that if antegrade conduction is occurring over the AV or his Purkinje system, then it will manifest typically as a narrow QRS tachycardia. And second can be antidromic AVRT, where the antegrade conduction or the antegrade limb is accessory pathway and retrograde limb is, that is what has been shown here also. This is a antidromic tachycardia, antegrade conduction through the pathway, retrograde through AV node. And that is what it will manifest as a wide QRS tachycardia. So with these few terms, I now hand it over to Dr. Rakesh Sarkar, who will be talking about approach to a case of asymptomatic AV reentrant tachycardia. Over to you, Dr. Rakesh. I am stopping my sharing of screen.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Rakesh, can you go further?
Sir, yes. Am I visible, sir?
Yes, screen is visible.
Yeah. Yes.
You can click on from there. Can you introduce yourself again to the viewers?
Sure, sir. So, good morning, everybody. My respected chairperson, seniors, and colleagues. I am Dr. Rakesh Sarkar, consultant in Department of Pacing and Electrophysiology in Medanta Medicity. However, I belong to Calcutta. That's why I have been incorporated in this group to just have a session. It's not a kind of teaching that I feel, but it will be kind of reciprocation with both the end. So thanks once again to IHRS for giving me the opportunity to talk on this topic. So I'll be talking briefly on the this asymptomatic WPW subset or population. That is actually a very controversial area to go ahead with the approach to re-stratify the population and for the subsequent management strategy. So I'll just try to put a clinical scenario just to have a kind of idea how to go ahead with this kind of situation if some patients come to us with this subset. So let's begin with the case of 18-year-old boy who admitted for getting some tonsillectomy surgery. But his ECG showed some abnormality, obviously some pre-excitation that ECG will show later, but he didn't have essentially any palpitation or any cardiac illness prior, and his ECO was absolutely normal at the time of evaluation. So his ECG was looking like this, and anybody who has been in cardiology probably could have even located the the location of the accessory pathway looking at the ECG. But essentially he didn't have any palpitation or cardiac illness prior. So how to go ahead for this patient prior to getting the surgery done? So that we'll come to later, and maybe we can able to speak at the end of the session or the discussion. So what is WPW syndrome? That DBs are already elegantly described to us, and I'm just trying to tell one or two things about WPW syndrome, which has been characterized historically or originally in the paper of American Heart Journal in 1930. It's the constellation of the paroxysmal tachycardia along with the bundle branch block pattern and short PR in a structurally normal heart. However, the bundle branch block was later described as the contribution of the delta wave, which is the part of the pre-excitation, and paroxysmal tachycardia is essentially a macro-reentrant tachycardia, which is actually AVRT. But what is the asymptomatic WPW subset delineates or actually confers to us it may be not only the paroxysmal tachycardia they always try to emphasize, maybe it's something else. So apart from macroreentrant tachycardia, which comes in the form of AVRT or AVRT, maybe antidromic or orthodromic. But apart from that, atrial fibrillation and ventricular fibrillation, which are also not very uncommon in this particular WPW subset. So basically, although the patient may remain asymptomatic for a quite long time with the pre-excitation in the ECG or in their background, but the theme is that they are also susceptible to get other types of arrhythmia in the form of atrial fibrillation or ventricular fibrillation, and maybe subsequently they have a few chance of getting macroreentrant tachycardia, although it is not a very substantial part of the natural history. And very rarely they might also land up with some kind of LV dysfunction, which may be contributed by the dysynchrony of the LV and RV contraction. So as I told, this atrial fibrillation also may be manifested or may actually masquerade some kind of other fatal arrhythmia which may look like VF. But basically, if we see background pre-excitation and patient may come to us with irregular rhythm and variable degree of pre-excitation, we may have to just rule out the possibility of atrial fibrillation with pre-excitation, which can be also catastrophe sometimes, and we may have to deal with this kind of patients. Although they are not having prior any palpitation or anything. So what are the conditions leading to innocent pre-excitation in a patient of WPW pattern? Because mostly WPW term itself signifies the patient who already has some kind of palpitation or kind of tachycardia. So weak retrograde or antegrade conduction across the accessory pathway may be not able to actually good enough to give rise to macroreentrant tachycardia. And sometimes the poor AV nodal conduction also can be also a substrate which may be not able to give rise to macroreentrant tachycardia. Another subset in the population of WPW syndrome with subtle degree of pre-excitation, which is called fasciculoventricular pathway. It's also a kind of innocent bystander pathway, which is actually not giving rise to any kind of tachycardia, but may actually mimic WPW syndrome, and we have to rule out this kind of pathway before we go for ablation. Another two varieties, which is called HCM variant with pre-excitation, commonly known to us as Danon syndrome or PRKG2 mutation. These are actually some pre-excitation variety which may actually come with structurally abnormality, maybe in the form of concentric LVH in form of Danon syndrome or PRKG2 mutation, and sometimes some congenital, particularly in post-surgery period, they may also come with pseudo pre-excitation. So these are the conditions which may actually mimics the pre-excitation, but actually they are not able to give rise to so-called macroreentrant tachycardia. So natural history of asymptomatic WPW substrate are antegrade conduction through the accessory pathway disappears in 40% of the patient in the first year of life. And so for the SVT, that means SVT also becomes non-inducible, suggesting the loss of retrograde conduction also. In children and adolescents, the probability of losing pre-excitation varies from 0 to 26%, while 30 to 30% of the adults lose anterograde conduction during 5 years of the follow-up. The rate of spontaneous arrhythmia observed during the follow-up of asymptomatic patient ranges from 8 to 21%. And studies of people with WPW syndrome have found that atrial fibrillation develops in 15% of adults and children followed up for 10 years. 15% of asymptomatic WPW syndrome patients can develop SVT. That means there is a population which may actually come up with SVT later on the life. However, at the time of diagnosis from ECG itself, they may be completely silent. So incidence and prevalence of malignant arrhythmia or SCD in the WPW syndrome. The risk of SCD, which is contributed by the rapid ventricular response, which is an assumed mechanism of VF in the given patient of WPW who are having the preponderance for having atrial fibrillation. So the incidence of SCD in WPW syndrome is reported to be 0 to 0.6% per year. And in symptomatic patient, the risk is 3 to 4% over lifetime, which is approximately 0.25% per year. But in the WPW pattern group, that means who doesn't have prior any palpitation or any symptoms, the risk is little lower, that is 0.05% to 0.2% per year. And different meta-analysis, particularly from the Klein group in Circulation 2012, they have demonstrated that the risk of SCD is little higher in the pediatric population in comparison to the adult group. And out of 550 asymptomatic and 450 symptomatic patients, they have shown that 15 patients develop VF who belong to actually asymptomatic group. 13 belong to asymptomatic group. So from this study, they have also demonstrated that probably a substantial population are actually at risk for developing VF or fatal arrhythmia. And SCD can be the first manifestation of the asymptomatic disease in up to 53%, which is very much worrisome. So what are the risk factors for sudden cardiac death in this particularly WPW pattern substrate? That means who doesn't have ever any palpitation or tachycardia prior. So these are the clinical risk factors, which is the male gender. It has been shown that male are always at higher risk of developing VF or malignant arrhythmia. Age is also a definitely contributing factor, particularly less than 30 years is considered to be fatal. And structurally heart disease definitely contributes because the patient who does develop VF has been shown to have some form of structural heart disease. Septal localization has been also proposed to be one of the contributing factor for developing sudden cardiac death, particularly posteroseptal in paponatal group that has been demonstrated. And what we can find in electrophysiological properties in this particular substrate, that is the anterograde accessory pathway conduction properties. So loss of pre-excitation actually is a factor or the surrogate which can tell us that the refractory period is actually longer. So probably the longer the refractory period, the chance of getting the conduction at short couple is less. So anterograde effective refractory period, if seen to be less than 250 milliseconds, is considered to be one of the highest risk factors, followed by shortest pre-excited RR interval, which is also considered to be fatal if it shown to be below 250 milliseconds. So what is shortest pre-excited RR interval, or which we call SPEDI? That means the shortest coupling interval during any incremental atrial pacing or during atrial fibrillation or during tachycardia. If the shortest coupling interval shown to be 250 milliseconds or less than that, it is considered to be one of the highest risk factors for this kind of WPW pattern patients group. And nevertheless, this atrioventricular reciprocating tachycardia or atrial fibrillation duration is also important. If it is shown to be more than 1 minute during the inducibility test or during other procedures, so that is also considered to be one of the risk factors, along with presence of the multiple accessory pathways. So guideline of this risk assessment of the asymptomatic population, as I said, it can be started from non-invasive way, intermittent pre-excitation or abrupt complete loss of delta during any sympathetic stimulation or during exercise, that can actually be considered to be having low chance of VF, although it is not completely true. And invisibly, if we see that antegrade effective refractory period or shortest pre-excited RR interval if shown to be less than 250 milliseconds, definitely it's going to be a challenge for the subset. Inducibility of tachycardia and multiple pathways that I talked earlier. So these are the way to look at the risk of this asymptomatic WPW patients. So if we just try to extrapolate this risk assessment tools, so it goes in the way that if we have a asymptomatic patient with pre-excitation at the baseline, so first we have to look at the pre-excitation loss at Holter or during exercise test. If it is not going to make a very good delineation of this thing, so electrophysiological study can be contemplated, and high risk factors can be elicited by electrophysiological study, which comes in the form of one Sperry or shortest pre-excited RR interval, which is considered to be less than 250 milliseconds, which is a high risk factor, or multiple pathways, or inducibility of the tachycardia. And if we get these kind of factors after electrophysiological study, catheter ablation can be offered to this subset of patients. However, it is little bit controversial, and the guideline says this can be done as a class 2 indication. However, risk assessment and the counseling part should be done properly with the selected population, because catheter ablation is not out of complication, especially in the pediatric population. So I want to conclude here with the message that the main argument against studying and treating asymptomatic patients has been the poor predictive accuracy of non-invasive and invasive risk stratifiers due to the low event rate of the SCD. Many patients would be unnecessarily treated and exposed to the risk of EP study and catheter ablation if all such asymptomatic patients are treated. However, after a critical analysis of the available evidence, expert judgment, discussing the risk and benefits of the procedure, including potential benefits, such a better quality of life and EP study to stratify risk and ablation procedure should be considered. Thank you.
Thanks, Rakesh. You have discussed the presentations and how to risk stratify. Just one thing I would ask you, whether is there any select population where you would like to do the EP stratification, risk stratification routinely? Maybe some the jobs or some employment on the basis of their hobbies or habits?
Yes, sir. So there are some populations who are definitely be undergone EP study, that means invasive. I feel that the people who are going to be pilot or driver for the rails or any kind of high risk jobs whose expertise and skills actually depends not only on their ability, but because of their fitness also. This kind of people should be also offered upfront regarding the invasive electrophysiological test, along with the athletes who are going to be the high risk population, because it has been seen that the athletes who are going to effort in a very vigorous exercise activity, they are also having some sudden cardiac death history.
One more thing is that now you have said that these patients who are having asymptomatic manifest pathway or asymptomatic pre-excitation, what do you do in your clinical practice? Do you rely heavily on non-invasive markers and stop there, or you tend to be invasive to assess their
So that's a very good question, sir. However, this non-invasive can give us some clue that whether this is a weak pathway or not, but we cannot completely rely on that. So it's depends, completely on the individual physician, and it should be, I think from my understanding, they should be at least offered to undergo the study. However, it may not be ablation first, but because a lot of
maybe that one can see for age of the patient, or one can see some broad criteria where, for example, in a 50-year-old man coming with asymptomatic pre-excitation, you may not be that keen as compared to a 20-year-old man who is coming to you with some of the histories. So probably
So that's another trick, sir. I can just tell you one story about one of our experience. Just few months back, one patient who is a known WPW patient came to us to get a CABG done. Otherwise, he was diagnosed to have WPW for last 15 years. He is 60 years of age. So when we just went to assess the risk of the WPW subset, we came to know by the AP study that his intrinsic AP node, his Purkinje system is completely not working. That means he is having CHB, and his pathway only is conducting 1:1 with the atrioventricular conduction. So this is another subset. However, this patient may not have any propensity for developing macroreentrant tachycardia. But we should also be cognizant about the thing that this kind of patient may also develop or land up with CHB at some point of time. So hardly it matters whether they are, belonging to age group of 30 or 50. But I think at least we may have some introspection in the pathway properties before we go ahead for any of the successive procedures.
So there are some quick questions. I think there are answers also. Should we? The question was, can we go for exercise testing in every case of asymptomatic WPW? Quick answers.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Secondly, when not to recommend EPS in asymptomatic pre-excitation pattern with non-invasive test suggesting persistence of pre-excitation. We have talked about it. Then particular stress on role of EP in asymptomatic children and adolescents. Should it be different than adults? Probably we also talked about that.
Yes.
Then can there be a quick recognition of high risk in septal? I think Suchit will talk about probably. He has discussed that anteroseptal and mid-septal. A classic triad, let's say QS pattern in lead 3, QS pattern in V1, and a positive tall R in AVF may identify the high risk group. Suchit will talk about it. And then what is the expected AERP of septal AP? Anything about that?
250.
I don't think that this is the area later on. Anteroseptal, mid-septal are high risk, yes. Patients with pre-excitation also need PPI and ablation of pre-excitation. Yes, if we are talking about ablation, then we should explain the patients that anteroseptal particularly or mid-septal positions may need a pacemaker that has been discussed, and discuss about apparent versus intermittent pre-excitation in assessing risk of WPW. He has just said that intermittent pre-excitation may be an indicator of low risk. So if there is any other question or comment, in a minute we can finish that and we go to the next talk. Any of the experts or the EP specialists who are sitting here can have comments. So if there is none, then I would request Suchit Majumdar, Dr. Suchit Majumdar, we know, I think everybody knows him. So I would like Suchit, you to share the screen and go for ECG localization of accessory pathways. Thank you, Suchit.
Thank you, sir, for the kind introduction. Thank you, Ashish Nambar, sir, and IHRS for this excellent meeting for the DM and DNB trainees and an opportunity for me to speak there. So I will be discussing about the ECG localization of accessory pathways. I am audible, I think. If any, it's not audible, then please let me know.
Yes, you are audible. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, sir. So as per, if we see the anatomy of the accessory pathways, these accessory pathways are nothing but a connection between the atrial and the ventricular tissue, and these usually have a property of an atrial tissue usually. And these connections occur in the AV groove mostly, okay? And these this AV groove, they cross through the epicardial fat pad and usually deep inside the fat pad. And if we localize the accessory pathways where they are usually present and not present, then we see that This is the view where we see the heart end on, and we see that through annulus like an LAO view. And in this view, we see that the tricuspid annulus and the mitral annulus is there. And we divide into a left lateral pathway, left anterior pathway, left posterior pathway, left posterior pathway, left posterolateral, and posteroseptal mitral annulus pathway. Likewise, right side also we divide into different parts. So if we group together, some pathways are left lateral pathways, some pathways are posteroseptal pathways. So posteroseptal pathways means the pathways which are present in the posteroseptal tricuspid annulus, posteroseptal mitral annulus, those associated with the coronary sinus. These all are called as a posteroseptal pathway. Though it is called posteroseptal, but usually septum plays a little role here because there is no septum here. Now, truly septal pathways are the mid-septal pathways, which are present here, and the anteroseptal pathways are related to the apex of the Cox triangle. So these are the anteroseptal pathways. Also, these pathways can be on the left-sided mid-septal pathways, which can also be present. So if we see the Dr. Dwivedi has discussed already, sir, that most common is the left lateral pathway, then comes the posteroseptal pathway in the frequency of presence. Next, I will come to the physiology. Dr. Dwivedi has already said. I just want to discuss one or two things. Anteriorly conducting pathways resulted in a pre-excited ECG. So this pre-excitation helps to localize the pathway ventricular insertion, because that will show where the pathway inserts in the ventricular end. For concealed pathway, the localization cannot be possible by this way because it is only conducting retrogradely. So there we have to find out the morphology of the retrograde P waves during tachycardia, and that will show the atrial insertion. Though most pathways are oblique, mostly are oblique, means they are not in the same line, they cross like this. So atrial insertion and ventricular insertion can be some part apart also. And WPW pattern, everyone has already discussed. I'm not going into details that. So why we need to localize pathways? That is also very important. So this provides the electrophysiologist with important information that can guide patient counseling regarding the risk and benefits of ablation. So before taking the patient, for example, if we think that the pathway is septal, where there is a more chance of injury to the AV conduction system, so we have to discuss that to the patient prior to ablation of that pathway, or prior to taking the patient to the lab, because you may end up into an AV block if you ablate the anteroseptal or mid-septal accessory pathway. Secondly, if you find that the ECG shows suggestion of a pathway which is left-sided, then we have to make a mental preparation that we may need to have a left heart catheterization, means maybe retrograde or by an atrial septal puncture, and we have to discuss those things with the patient also. And maybe we have to see the arterial diameter for entering the sheath and all these things. So other things are not very important. So I will go to the localization. So localization is usually done by the delta wave. Delta wave is nothing but the initial part of the QRS, which is slurred. So this slurred part usually indicates the insertion of the bypass tract. And first 20 milliseconds is taken for the algorithms by which we localize the pathway, because that is the part which is usually uncorrupted from the influence of a fusion, which actually goes. So this QRS is usually a result of fusion, means something is coming through the AV node, something is coming through the accessory pathway. So the contribution of both is there in this QRS. So this initial part usually indicates the contribution of the pathway. Then that causes slurring, because if the pathway inserts into the myocardium, it doesn't insert into a fascicle or conducting system. That's why it is slurred. And this slurred part usually helps us to determine where the pathway is inserted into the myocardium. Now, just general some principles are there. So if we see that precordial transition, this progresses from left from right to left. We have a precordial transition from a negative QRS, negative delta, to a positive delta when we go to the left side. So if you see here, These are all negative delta. And when we go to the left side, we have a positive delta in V1. Left-sided bypass tracts exhibit positive delta waves in V1, while right-sided have negative delta. The farthest the bypass tract is to the left or right to the mitral annulus, the larger the positive delta, and the farther the bypass tract is to the right along the tricuspid annulus, the deeper the negative delta. So these are the things. Secondly, frontal plane axis, lead 1 primarily reflects the horizontal axis. So if a bypass tract is close to the left axilla, it will produce a negative complex in lead 1. Conversely, if a bypass tract is closer to the right axilla, it will produce a positive complex in lead 1. So left-sided pathways will have a negative complex in V1, left lateral truly, and right-sided pathways will have a positive complex in lead 1. The inferior leads usually reflect the vertical frontal plane axis. And if the inferior leads 2-3 AVF is positive, then it is a pathway which is come from the superior part. And if the inferior axis, inferior 2-3 AVF, these are negative, then the pathway is located inferiorly. Now, left versus right free wall pathways. Ventricular activation originating from the right ventricle is expected to produce a predominantly negative deflection in the right precordial leads. RS ratio greater than 1 or a dominant R wave in lead V1 is consistent with a left-sided bypass tract, whereas RS transition after lead V2 suggests right-sided bypass tract. So when the RS transition is at lead V2 or between lead V1 and V2, the RS waves in the left lateral leads, that is 1 and AVL, favors the right-sided bypass tract. Otherwise, if that RS complex is not present in the 1 and AVL, this favors the left-sided bypass tract. So in nutshell, so it should be after V2 this transition if it is a right-sided bypass tract. And in V1, if V1 R by S ratio is more than 1 or a dominant third, it indicates a left-sided bypass tract. Now coming to the septal bypass tract, one is the anteroseptal bypass tract. So anteroseptal bypass tract, they exhibit a positive delta waves in the inferior lead because it is present superiorly. And delta waves are negative often in V1 and V2, but slightly positive delta waves also can be observed. While mid-septal accessory pathway, this differs from the anteroseptal in that the lead 3 is predominantly negative, and we have a negative or isoelectric in lead AVF. So in anteroseptal, these all leads are positive, while in mid-septal, the lead 3 and is negative and the AVF is isoelectric. The delta wave in V1 is usually negative, but RS transition occurs after lead V2, that is between V2 and V3. So if we compare these two, mid-septal and anteroseptal, we see that negative delta wave in lead 3, a biphasic delta wave in AVF, and the larger R by S ratio in lead V2 is suggestive of a mid-septal accessory pathway rather than an anteroseptal accessory pathway. Now coming to the posteroseptal accessory pathway. So posteroseptal accessory pathway, they have a deep delta wave in lead 3. The delta wave is often negative in AVF, especially for right posteroseptal bypass tract. If you have a negative delta wave in lead 2, it predicts an epicardial location of a posteroseptal bypass tract. I will show an example later on. Lead V2 typically shows a positive delta wave in the posteroseptal bypass tract with an R wave greater than the S wave. The negative delta wave polarity in V1 with an abrupt transition from V1 to V2 favors a right-sided location of a posteroseptal bypass tract. While in left posteroseptal, they are often associated with biphasic or positive delta in V1 and V2. If you have a tallest recorded precordial R in the mid-precordial lead, usually it is found in the left posteroseptal, while the tallest precordial R wave is seen in the right precordial leads in the right posteroseptal. So for example, this patient, you have a delta wave which is abruptly changes its polarity from V1 to V2, as also the R by S ratio changes. So this is a septal accessory pathway. Now if we go to the 2-3 AVF, we see that 3 and AVF is definitely negative. So that, but 2 is not negative. If 2 is negative, it goes in favor of an epicardial pathway. So this is all posteroseptal accessory pathway. This is also a similar example where we have an abrupt transition from V1 to V2. There is a negative delta to a positive delta here, and also R by S ratio is also transition is there. and there is 3 and AVF is negative. So that also goes in posteroseptal bypass tract. Now these are all right posteroseptal bypass tract because V1 doesn't have significant, it is not a biphasic delta here. So if we see this patient, here we see we have a positive, where we have a positive component of the RS also in V1. So if we have this positive component also in V1, apart from the other characteristics I have said, it goes in favor of a left posteroseptal bypass tract. Now coming to the algorithms, there are different algorithms which are validated. How they are validated? Because those are the places where the accessory pathway were later on ablated, and they were compared between the ECG localization and the final place of ablation, and by that the algorithms are made. So there are certain limitations. That is, there is a biological variation in anatomy, that is the rotation of the heart in the thorax. There is a variable degree of pre-excitation because the maximal pre-excitation will give the best result. But often in surface ECG, we don't have, usual ECG, we don't have a maximal pre-excitation. So this may also have an effect. And also if you have an intrinsic ECG abnormality such as a prior MI or ventricular hypertrophy or presence of a multiple bypass tract, these can affect the algorithms. These algorithms can be located. Also congenital heart disease, if they are present, those also situs and all these things, this will also, those algorithms will not work there. So these act as a orientation tool rather than precise localization tool. And the algorithms are most accurate in predicting a left-sided free wall bypass tract and the least accurate in predicting a mid-septal or right anteroseptal bypass tract. Now, this is the most commonly used algorithm, and as of now, the most accurate algorithm here. Usually, the sensitivity and these things is around 87% of this Arruda algorithm. This Arruda algorithm, I will just go into here. What they have done, they have compared with a successful ablation site in 135 patients, and then they have applied it into 121 patients later on to see the validity. So this is the Arruda algorithm. This is most important. We have to go step by step. We have to go from step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4. So we cannot jump step. First of all, we see step 1. If it is a left lateral pathway, then if the lead 1 we have to see. Lead 1 if it is isoelectric or plus minus or negative delta, then it goes to a left lateral, left-sided accessory pathway. Then we see AVF. If AVF is positive, it is a left lateral or anterolateral pathway. If AVF is isoelectric or negative, then it is left posterior accessory pathway. Now after this, for example, in the ECG, this is not there. Then we go to step 2. Step 2, if we see the lead 2, if the lead 2 is negative, delta, then it indicates a pathway which is associated with the venous system and an epicardial pathway. Now this, if neither is present, then we go to step 3. In step 3, we see the if the delta is isoelectric or negative in V1, then we see it is a septal pathway, and we see AVF. Based on AVF, if it is positive, then it can be either an anteroseptal or a mid-septal. And if AVF is negative, it is a posteroseptal accessory pathway. And if AVF is isoelectric, it can be either a posteroseptal tricuspid annulus or a posteroseptal mitral annulus. Now, finally, if neither of these are present, we go to the right free wall accessory pathway, where the V1 delta is positive. And if it is AVF is positive, it is anterolateral or anterior. If it is negative or isoelectric, it is usually posterior or lateral, right lateral. So that is differentiated by lead 2. So this is very important. For example, I am going to some examples. This ECG. Here we see that 1 is neither isoelectric nor negative. So this first step is gone. Second step, lead 2. Lead 2 delta is not also negative. So second step is also gone. The third step, here if we draw a line from the earliest delta in any lead, you have to draw a line. You have to take a 12-lead simultaneous ECG. And if you draw a line, you will see that the delta is isoelectric in lead V1. And if it is isoelectric in lead V1, then you go to AVF. So AVF, you can see the delta is slightly positive. So if it is positive, then you have to go to lead 3. Lead 3 shows R less than S. So you can, by this, you can locate that this is a mid-septal accessory pathway. For example, this ECG, I have already discussed. Here also, you see that the first step is not there. Second step, lead 2 is not negative. Third step, V1 is negative. And if it is negative, then you go to AVF. AVF is negative, so it goes to the posteroseptal accessory pathway or CS-OS accessory pathway. So you need not go to the fourth step. So you will go 1, 2, 3, 4. So you cannot directly see this step and oh, this goes here. No, you have to go 1, 2, 3, 4. You cannot skip. For example, if you see this step and you miss this step, then you may miss a epicardial accessory pathway localization opportunity and just go and say, oh, it's a posteroseptal accessory pathway. Now, this, for example, this one is an example of an epicardial accessory pathway. So if you go by the Arrow algorithm also, you see that the lead 2 has a steep delta wave. If you have a steep delta wave in lead 2, definitely you negative delta, you go and go to the epicardial accessory pathway. Because this is very important, because you need to localize this before the case also. Because in that case, you have to find out whether there is some venous abnormality in the CS. Like in the, yeah.
You have to go a bit in a minute, couple of minutes.
Yeah, it's over, almost over. So if you have a venous abnormality in this, so the CS diverticulum or vein dilatations, these has to be suspected, and you have to do a coronary angiogram or some form of CS angiogram to see these are present before jumping onto the case. Also, if you have venous abnormality, you may have difficulty in putting the ablation catheter inside. So that also has to be noted. Now, I'm not going into the other part. There are different algorithms are there. So this is another algorithm that is also good. You have to find out the Q wave isoelectric or negative in means delta in 1AVL V6, and based on that, this algorithm is there. This is algorithm which is based only on RS ratio and doesn't take any account of the delta. So, and another I have already told, if you have a concealed accessory pathway, then you have to see the retrograde P waves and help in the localization of the bypass tract. Now, most important is lead 1 and V1 and inferior lead. If P wave vector in lead 1 is highly negative, P is highly suggestive of left free wall, whereas a positive vector is right free wall accessory pathway. On the other hand, a negative P in lead V1 predicts the right-sided bypass tract. And if P wave is positive or negative, if it is positive, then the bypass tract inserts superiorly in the atrium. If it is negative, then it is inserting inferiorly to the atrium. So there are algorithms. Finally, a few points. Concealed accessory pathway are more common in left free wall or posteroseptal location. Antegrade decremental conduction property was associated only with right-sided free wall pathways most commonly. And thirdly, if it is decremental conduction, this is noted by something called as a subtle pre-excitation. Means in the ECG, it shows near normal PR, but some mild pre-excitation. You don't find a Q wave in V6, and also, so you can find a subtle pre-excitation. So that goes in more favor of either a left lateral pathway or a right-sided pathway. Now, if you have an underlying structural abnormality, that also helps you to localize. For example, if you have an Epstein's abnormality, Epstein's anomaly, you will have most likely a right posterolateral or right posterior pathway. Corrected TG, if you have, usually you will have a left-sided Epsteinoid malformation and pathways will be located there. Thank you.
Thank you, Srijit. Thanks for this collective algorithms and comparisons. However, for those who are not seeing those many cases, what Srijit has said can be, few take-homes can be that wider the resting QRS, more accurate you may be in localizing the pathway, because then you are having maximum pre-excitations. One can go for, this is a point of debate, if you are not finding very wide QRS in sinus rhythm, one can resort to a carotid sinus massage so that AV conduction may be delayed and you can have more manifestations. And third, broad working principle should be that when it is clear-cut R in V1, it will be a left-sided pathway. If it is, as he has discussed in one of the algorithms, if it is totally negative, then it is a right-sided pathway. Secondly, when majority of leads are upwards, inferior leads, it is anterior. If majority of leads are inferior or let's say negative, it will be posterior broadly. And third, if there is a transition in V2, V1, V1 to V2, then you are dealing with a septal pathway. Later, the transition away from the septum is the pathway. So three broad things if generally MD boys remember: left or right bundle branch block in V1, anterior upwards majority inferior leads or downward majority inferior leads will tell you anterior or posterior locations, and more lateral the transition, more away from the septum is the pathway. If there is transition, it is more likely to be septal position in V1, V2. So now I would go to some quick things, quick question, because we don't have time. When do you take posterior septal pathway will be ablated from right side or left side in EP? I think this is a EP question. Can adenosine be used to differentiate AV pathway and nodoventricular pathway? I think it is too advanced a question. So any other comments, anything else?
So Suchit, one thing, Ashish Nabari. Suchit, there is this attitudinal location that is talked of often, that lateral should be referred to as superior, and what we conventionally talk as posterior should be called inferior if you look at the AV rings. If you make some comments on that. And second is, can you localize the pathway by its retrograde activation?
Yeah, I have
Morphology.
1 second just. So 1 second. Sorry. Okay, now that picture I was having. Okay, so I don't know why it is not coming here. Stop share, or two people are sharing most likely. 1 second.
Yes, I think you can be verbally, you can answer that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, sir, you were telling that we should be called as nowadays. Previously, we used to call that this part near the his. If it is a tricuspid ring and this is the mitral ring, near the his was called as anteroseptal, mid-septal, and posteroseptal. Now we have seen that septum is present only in this area, the mid-septal area, while not they are not present in the this thing anteroseptal and posteroseptal area. So in the posteroseptal and anteroseptal area, it should be called as this thing. It should be called as paraseptal. That is, it's called as a superior paraseptal area. This is called as an anteroseptal area, and posteroseptal area is called as an inferior paraseptal area. It's not a septal; it is a paraseptal. So this is the more accurate term to call as a superior paraseptal and the inferior paraseptal.
The second is, can you localize the pathway during an orthodromic AVRT by the ST segment or the P wave?
Yeah, I have already mentioned in my talk that thing I wanted to share. Anyway, so if we see the, for example, when we don't have a pathway which is antegrade manifest, then concealed pathway, you can see the P waves to see the locality of from where the atrium is activated. So if the P is negative, then the direction of activation is from the left side. 1 AVL if P is negative. So if you see 1 AVL P is negative in an orthodromic AVRT, you can think that probably we are dealing with a left-sided accessory pathway. If you think that if V1P is positive, then you can think that mostly we are dealing with a right-sided accessory pathway. If we see that the P wave is positive in the usually P wave will be negative in most AVRT. If we see the P wave is positive in an AVRT, though we often think that is more likely to have an atrial tachycardia. But another closed DD is a pathway which is inserting superiorly, means anterior pathway or anterior mitral annular pathway.
A very quick question: how would you know that anteroseptal or superior pathway will be ablated from aortic non-coronary sinus or right side by ECG?
By ECG.
Question from RD Yadav.
I don't know.
Okay. RD may write here because I do not know. So from here, I would hand it over back to Ashish to take over to the EP of these AV reentrant pathway. I thank both Rakesh and Suchit for their elegant talks. Thank you.
sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Ashish, you are mute.
I think I thank Dr. Dwivedi for this wonderful conduct of the first half of this session teaching program. And now I'll hand over to Dr. Raja Selvaraj to discuss two more topics today's session. Raja, over to you.
Yeah, hello. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Raja from JIPMER. So we are a little behind time, so let's start off quickly. We are starting with the role of invasive procedures, and Dr. Debabrata will first talk on the pre-ablation evaluation of the electrophysiologic evaluation of pathways and the catheter placement. It's not easy to cover this in 15 minutes, but I hope he'll sort of cover the key points which are important for the junior EPs to understand. So Deba, you can start off.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dwivedi sir, Raja sir, and Dr. Nabar for giving us the opportunity. So unfortunately, the last couple of days, my internet is giving trouble. If there is any issue, sir, please interrupt me. I have a recorded version as well, which I can play and it will run seamlessly, hopefully. So moving on to your topic, just to introduce myself, I am Dr. Debabrata Bera. I'm electrophysiologist in Kolkata, Rabindranath Tagore Hospital, Narayana. So we will discuss three topics briefly. One is how are the catheter placement done. Second is what are the basal intervals we need to see in a EP study, and a VA conduction. The second two topics I'll go a little slowly because many of our audience are just beginners in the field of EP. So this one diagram we need to know when we place catheters. We generally try to place catheters in as many as places possible, but that is not always feasible in a relatively quick EP study or RF ablation. So what are the common catheters we use? We use a high right atrial catheter somewhere near the sinus node or sometimes in the right atrial appendage. We use a catheter as a surrogate of AV node somewhere near the His bundle, which is just below the AV node. We always put a catheter in the right ventricle, and we put a catheter in the coronary sinus, which is in the left AV groove. In the right AV groove, generally we do not put a catheter because there is no stable structure like that. But in places where we need a right annulus to be mapped like a right-sided accessory pathway, we can put a catheter which is called halo catheter. We'll come to that. So this is one of the schematic diagram. This is LAO and RAO. In these, generally these two views are helpful in placing the catheters. What you see here in RAO, that this is the area of somewhere the sinus node, high right atrium, posterior high right atrium, and the His catheter is somewhere here. It is difficult to just tell in one slide, but as you get expertise, you know that where the His catheter will be located. Then the coronary sinus. Coronary sinus generally is placed, the os is seen in RAO view. Then you place it in the LAO view, which goes like this, the coronary sinus. It can be placed from the groin or it can be placed from above, from the superior approach. We have a RV catheter and sometimes we have an extra mapping catheter. Otherwise, we generally use the same RV catheter as the ablation catheter, and with the same catheter, we can ablate the pathway or AV node, AV nodal reentry or the atrial tachycardia. I'll come into little more detail in the placement of coronary sinus catheter in subsequent slides. So when we have placed our catheters, this is how we generally find. So I'll just spend some time on this this slide. So how do you know which catheter is placed where? It doesn't mean that if you have a His catheter named at His, it will go into the His catheter. So from the electrogram, you have to tell or you have to decide whether your catheter is placed properly. So if you see this His catheter is a place, His is possibly His is the in normal heart, His is the only place where you have three discrete signals with isoelectric intervals. You have an atrial electrogram, then you have a His electrogram, then you have a ventricular electrogram. Now, how do you know this is AHV in EP language? This may be very simple for expert electrophysiologists, but for the beginners, I would just like to mention, you need to correlate with the ECG. If any electrogram correlates somewhere near the P wave timing, like you see here in the coronary sinus catheter, this we will call A wave. Whatever correlates with the QRS complex, we will call it a V, like this catheter, and smaller signals in this coronary sinus catheter as well. Why the coronary sinus catheter picks up both the A and V? It is because it is near the annulus. It is more on the atrial side, so it will have a larger A and a smaller V. And this gives us very important information during mapping and ablation. Now, the only place where we can get three signals is the His, which I have told. So moving to our basic intervals and how do we start a EP study. So if we discuss about or you talk about any supraventricular tachycardia, already your A to V, that is the antegrade conduction, is by default AV node. You don't need to elicit it. There can be dual ventricular physiology, but you know that in a supraventricular tachycardia or a narrow QRS tachycardia, the antegrade conduction is by default AV node. What you need to elicit is the VA conduction. The V to A route can vary. Like in AV nodal reentrant tachycardia, the VA will be via a AV node, which can be fast or a slow pathway. In atrioventricular reentrant tachycardia or orthotomic AVRT, the retrograde route is via an accessory pathway. In atrial tachycardia, there is no active role of this VA conduction, and the VA interval is a pseudo interval. It is just because you have to deduct from the tachycycle length your antegrade time, that is A to V time, and whatever remains is the VA. So true VA conduction is actually required. It is mandatory for atrioventricular reentrant tachycardia, and in AV NRT, there is a VA conduction in majority of the patients. So just to spend a little more time, how we nomenclature of the coronary sinus catheter. So this coronary sinus catheter has been placed in LAO view from femoral root, and whatever here the tip is called CS12 bipole, then this is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So whatever is distal to the operator is CS12, whichever is most proximal is proximal. PCS is CS910. Generally, we use decapolar catheter. Duodecapolar catheter can also be used in left-sided accessory pathway when you need to map almost all of the mitral annulus, and that gives you very clear picture where your pathway is located. You need to place it very carefully so that, like in previous view, you see somewhere your coronary sinus catheter roughly fluoroscopically is near the left edge of the vertebral column in LAO view. The septum is somewhere there, the coronary sinus os is somewhere there. This is a relatively perfectly placed coronary sinus catheter, although for confirmation you need a coronary sinus angiogram or levo phase of the coronary angiogram. That is not always possible. Now this catheter, if you see, half of the catheter is hanging in the right atrium or right ventricle or IVC. So only half of this is inside. So if you look at the electrogram with this catheter position, your interpretation will be fallacious. Similarly, for this catheter positioning where the CS catheter is deeply pushed inside, in this case it was deliberately pushed inside because we had a accessory pathway somewhere here. But in general, if you place the catheter so deep, your proximal coronary sinus is very deep inside the coronary sinus. So you may have a fallacious interpretation if you try to interpret the VA conduction or the tachycardia activation. So after you have placed the catheters, you need to see in baseline ECG what we are going to see. In a SVT case, most likely we'll see whether there is a pre-excitation there or not. Is there any bundle branch block which is going to alter our interpretation during a tachycardia? And how is the PR interval? Like in this case, we can see there is no pre-excitation. The PR interval looks absolutely normal and there is no delta wave. Once we go into the case and we have placed all the three catheters, HRA catheter is not here in this case. So when you have placed all the three catheters, you see a discrete A followed by H and followed by V. Now, when you measure the interval, like in the first electrogram I showed, the HV interval was H to earliest V was positive. It was around 40 milliseconds. Here what you see, the His and the beginning of QRS, that is the earliest activation of the ventricle, is almost online. That is, there is hardly any HV interval which is zero. Sometimes it can be negative. This tells you that you are certainly dealing with a accessory pathway, manifest accessory pathway, that is WPW syndrome in a setting of a narrow QRS tachycardia. So this is the importance of placing a His catheter properly. Then you have a coronary sinus catheter. It is like proximal to distal. The smaller number is distal. So this is a central activation. I will like to take a little, I'll go back to this slide and I'll like to give you an idea. In around 50 to 70% of the general population, we have a normal VA conduction, even in general population who do not have tachycardia. In them, the VA route will be like a central activation, like AV conduction. In a patient, if you have a left-sided accessory pathway or a free wall right-sided accessory pathway, when you pace the ventricle, the earliest A will go to the atrium quickly by that accessory pathway on the right free wall or the left free wall. So what will happen, in contrast to normal population where the VA conduction is via AV node, or AV-NRT cases where the VA conduction is via AV node, you will find the conduction of earliest atrial signal somewhere away from the septum. We call it eccentric conduction. I will give you some of case examples. So what you need to see, why the V pacing is very, very important, because on the V pacing, you see the VA conduction and you decide what is the VA route. And that is almost the most important finding in AV-NRT, AVRT cases. For atrial tachycardia, as I said, that doesn't have much of importance. So you need to see whether there is a VA conduction present or not. You also need to see whether it is concentric or eccentric. You also need to see whether the VA conduction is decremental and or non-decremental. And you also need to see the ERP of the VA route. Sir, I am audible, sir, properly?
Yes,
clearly audible. Yeah.
So in this particular case, what we are doing a ventricular pacing at an interval of 500 milliseconds. So straight ventricular pacing at 500 milliseconds. What we see here, that each ventricular activation or depolarization is followed by a atrial signal. So we will call it VA conduction is present. That is the first interpretation. The VA conduction is present. Now, if you draw a line among the atrial signals, if you draw a line, you see the earliest atrial activation is somewhere near the His bundle. So you know it is having a central activation, followed by proximal coronary sinus going away towards the free wall of left atrium. So that means this is a central conduction. We call it VA conduction present, and it looks like concentric activation. We will describe what is eccentric and what is decremental in next couple of slides. Now, in this particular example, you are pacing the ventricle. There is QRS depolarization in each of the paced beat, but you would hardly see any consistent VA conduction. This is the A, which looks like it is walking through. So you can, in other words, you can call it a VA dissociation during ventricular pacing. So this tells you there is no VA conduction at baseline. You can give isoprenalin and see whether there is VA conduction on drugs, but at baseline, we can comment that there is no VA conduction. And if you prove this, that there is no VA conduction even at slower rates, you can essentially rule out a AVRT in the background of narrow QRS tachycardia. In the background of narrow QRS tachycardia, let's say recurrent narrow QRS tachycardia, this finding in the beginning of a case tells you the high pretest probability the patient might have atrial tachycardia, because that is the tachycardia which do not require any help of V2A conduction. And from this one single slide, I can rule out AVRT, that is pathway mediated tachycardia, and AV-NRT also becomes unlikely. It becomes unlikely, although you cannot rule it out. Now coming to this particular case example, you see the sinus beat first. So you have the His high right atrium atrial signal earliest, followed by a His, followed by a coronary sinus activation in sinus rhythm. When you do V pacing, we are doing a ventricular extra stimulus. VES stands for ventricular extra stimulus. You give a basal trend of, let's say, 500 or 400 millisecond gap, and then you give a premature beat. What you see here, the VA interval during the basal trend followed by a VA interval in the premature beat is longer. So we call this decremental. So this VA conduction property by and large is a marker for AV nodal VA conduction. This is also supported by the finding that your atrial electrogram in the His catheter is earliest among all. It is earlier than the HRA. It is earlier than the coronary sinus. So this particular slide tells you that the VA conduction is concentric, that is from the activation pattern, and from the timing, this V2A, and this V2A is longer. That tells you it is decremental. This is a property of AV node. In contrast, this is another patient where you see you have given a basal trend 500 millisecond of ventricular pacing followed by one extra stimulus. Your VA time remains identical to the basal trend. So although you have decreased the ventricular extra stimulus timing, this 400 millisecond in contrast to the 500 millisecond basal trend, your VA time remains constant. So this is called non-decremental conduction, and this will be called a accessory pathway conduction. This is again supported this much more premature beat, 500 millisecond followed by one beat of 320 millisecond. The VA time remains same as before, and also you can see the earliest activation pattern is somewhere near this catheter. We call this bracketing. It is like a first bracket like this. So that actually pinpoints the earliest atrial activation is somewhere near the CS4, and in fluoroscopically, if you see, in fluoroscopically it will be somewhere here. So not central, not very lateral, somewhere here. You can localize the pathway precisely from that single slide. From this slide, this is VA conduction. Also during a tachycardia, the atrial activation will be like this, and you can precisely localize your accessory pathway will be somewhere here when you can see the bracketing. Always you may not see the bracketing. I will show such case examples. Like this patient, this is another patient. What you find here during V pacing, your earliest activation is near CS12. This is the A. So this is V and A. The earliest activation is reverse or in contrast to the previous case example. So what you find here, this is the same patient when you have onset of tachycardia, the atrial activation, earliest atrial activation is near CS12. What does it mean? Your atrial activation, earliest atrial activation, that is retrograde route from V to A, is somewhere near the CS12 or ahead of CS12. So your pathway is located somewhere here. If you can push the coronary catheter and you can bracket the atrial electrogram, you can actually more precisely localize, like I showed you the last case. So in this case, we call this eccentric activation because your CS12 atrial electrogram is much earlier than your his atrial electrogram. That means your this lateral part is activated much earlier than your septal his catheter, whichever is placed somewhere this area. Maybe my second or third last slide. So this is one of a case example where you see the ventricular and atrial activation is near simultaneous. This activation pattern rules out AVRT. As I told, AVRT or the accessory pathway mediated tachycardia is the only tachycardia where the VA route is mandatory and the route is in series. So it is a true VA conduction. That cannot be zero. It will be some thought at least 30-40 milliseconds from V to A. It cannot be near simultaneous. So this tells you most likely the diagnosis is AVNRT, where it can be a pseudo interval. The VA can be near simultaneous, or an atrial tachycardia with a prolonged PR interval. This one slide tells you that you have more A than V. So this is not possible in AVRT again. AVRT is a tachycardia where your number of A and number of V will be same. That is 1:1 VA relation has to be maintained. This generally tells you that A more than V is a atrial tachycardia, but although it is possible, rarely possible in AVNRT as well. This is my last slide. So when you are doing a V pacing, you can see the QRS complex. The V1 is LBBB morphology. So you are pacing from the right ventricle. In the first beat, you see the VA conduction is concentric, central, proximal to distal. But in the next beat, it is eccentric, from distal to proximal. So what does it tell? In this beat, there was AV nodal conduction, that is central conduction. In this beat, there is eccentric conduction. So when the AV node was blocked during the ventricular pacing, it started going or conducting via the accessory pathway. So I'll stop here and take up any question if there is.
Thank you, Dr. Debabrata. So I think we've been trying to answer most questions that come up in the chat. And since we want to keep to time, I think we should move to the next one. But to just sort of reiterate the key points that you covered, I think is to place all 4 catheters, not to skip on catheters, place an RA, CS, HIS and RV catheters. And you should know the position of the CS catheter. For a regular EP study, you would place with the CS proximal at the CS os. But there are situations where, like you said, to obtain bracketing, you might push the CS in, but you should always be aware how your CS is placed to be able to interpret this. And then obtain bracketing. And if you don't obtain bracketing, you should know that you're not precisely localizing. It can be anywhere beyond the earliest that you see. And to look for a decremental pattern of conduction on the VA when you pace the ventricle and look at the VA timing. And also you can always look for the His in the VA and look for the VH versus the VA intervals. That is also gives very good clues, because when you have a pathway, the VH and VA will be dissociated. And like you said, simple things like looking at the VA interval and the AV ratio also can help you quickly rule out axillary pathway in some situations. So with that, we'll move on to the last one, which is going to be about ablation. Should really be more about mapping, I think. So both mapping and ablation in a patient with WPW. Dr. Sanjeev Mukherjee, please start.
Thank you, sir. Respected chairpersons and my dear friends, we'll quickly go on in the next subsequent talk, where I'm going to talk about ablation. So now, till now, whatever we have learned about how to interpret electrograms, how to diagnose a WPW, ablation is the final step in the procedure that we are going to go forward with. And so I'll start with the case straightforward. This was a 27-year-old gentleman had recurrent episodes of palpitation. And during one of these episodes of palpitation, he was in his office and he lost consciousness and then that was the time he was evaluated. And this was the ECG. I'll just blow it up a bit so for everyone's. So Suchi has already discussed about localization. So this is the ECG that he comes with, and this is our lab ECG. So let's evaluate it. And if you look at lead 1, the delta is positive. Lead 2, again, delta is positive. We'll go to lead V1, where R by S ratio is more than 1. That is predominantly positive R that you notice here. So once you look, R by S ratio is more than 1 in V1, you will go to lead AVF, where also the delta is positive. So looking at this, this is predominantly a left free wall pathway, most likely a left lateral pathway. That is what appears from the ECG. And when you have this kind of an ECG, the next step that you must think about is you must start planning, because it is most likely a left free wall pathway and we will have to access the mitral annulus. Therefore, our approach appropriately has to be in that direction, and the patient must be told. And this is, we have already discussed many a times, all these pathways are basically fine strands of myocardial tissue, which bridges the AV annulus. And therefore, whenever you're going to ablate, whenever you think about ablating, predominant ablations will be either on the mitral annulus when it is a left-sided pathway, or it will be a tricuspid annulus when you're planning or when you have a pathway on the right side. So your ablation will be on the annulus. And that is the whole reason of telling. So in this case, we get into the case, HV is negative. Deba has discussed very clearly that if you, in a pathway where you have got a fusion between the pathway conduction and the nodal conduction, your HV interval will be negative. So your red catheter is on the His, and the green is the starting of the QRS. And we notice that the HV interval is negative, which is about -36 milliseconds. So it is a negative HV, clearly showing that it is a fusion of the pathway conduction and the nodal conduction. Now let's look at the signal again. The top, my pointer, yes. So this is your V. Obviously, this is a paced V. Clearly, we can see a paced V. Subsequently, there's a small signal here, which is the A. In CS1, 2, you see the A. 3, 4, the A is here. And by 5, 6, and 7, 8, the A appears to be a kind of fusing. So it is not the type of conduction that we will expect when we pace V, as was shown. You will get a concentric decremental conduction, whereas here you are getting some kind of bracketing. A is kind of fusing in 5, 6, 7, 8. So when you get this kind of a conduction, mostly this is going through the pathway, and as discussed, this is called a non-decremental. This is not decremental because your VA is not going to increase even if you pace at a faster cycle length. There should not be any decrement. By decrement, we know that whenever there is conduction through the node, when impulse goes through the node, it has to decrement as you pace faster. But if it goes through the pathway, it is not going to decrement. So that is what was happening. It was not decrementing. There is a kind of bracketing. So it is going through the pathway. Most likely pathway will be in this region. So this is what we know from our discussion. inside the lab itself, when we are placing catheters, the patient developed tachycardia. Very clearly, the first beat is going through an accessory pathway, second also, third also. And after that, he has gone into what we have discussed, an orthodromic reentrant tachycardia, a narrow QRS tachycardia. Along with that, he had hypotension, clearly showing that his episode that he had in his office was an ORT, and he has got an overt pathway. So obviously, the next step is to plan for his ablation. Now, in a left-sided pathway, whenever you decide to ablate, you have two options of accessing the mitral annulus. You can access it by doing a septal puncture and going to the mitral annulus. That's called an antegrade approach. Or you can go through the aorta and access the mitral annulus from the ventricular aspect, which is called a retrograde approach. Now, which approach should I go for? Now, if you look at literature, there is a paper from Dr. Scheinman's group in JACC 1993 clearly showing that both these approaches are complementary. There is nothing like one is better or one has lesser complication. Both will has their own set of complications. So whenever you decide as an electrophysiologist to ablate, it is better to have expertise on both these modes of accessing the mitral annulus, because both may have complications, but both may help when the other fails. So they say that they are complementary, and in many cases you can reach a success rate of 100%. So you can use both of the approaches. My approach normally is I most of the time try to approach antegradely, that is by the septal puncture. The reason being that if you access initially by a retrograde approach, that is going through the aorta, many a times you have to anticoagulate the patient, and then going for a antegrade approach or a transeptal puncture, sometimes on heparin, may be a bit risky. So therefore you might have to reverse heparin, you might have to post him on another day. So therefore, first approach most of the time is an antegrade approach. So we do a septal puncture. In this case, it was an SL1 sheath and a standard broken borough needle, a blue curve ablation catheter. And always remember, keep an eye on heparin. You're going on the left side, make sure that your heparin, the moment you cross, give heparin, monitor ACT every 15 minutes, make sure that it is in the therapeutic range, because otherwise embolism is always a risk that we should avoid. Now, so this is normally the way we do a standard. Our pigtail is there in the non-coronary. You've got a CS catheter, posterior aspect, you've got a His catheter, and this is the sheath that we have taken in, and then we start mapping. And this is how we map. In LO view, this was the site where we ablated this case. It is definitely a lateral aspect, and CS catheter is inside CS. And as discussed, the pole is 1-2 pole is more on the left aspect, and the distal, this is called 9-10, which is more on the CS os in the atrial aspect. So this is where we ablated this pathway. And when you do an antegrade mapping, like in this case, there are certain points that you must keep in mind. Pathways that conduct antegradally can be mapped during sinus rhythm, because you have a marker, you have an overt pre-excitation that you're able to see. So you can map these pathways antegradally. And how do you do it? So you must make sure that in your mapping catheter, when you map, your AV should be fused, and the ventricular signal should be earlier than the delta. So locate the earliest ventricular activation on the annulus. Atrial to ventricular amplitude ratio you have to keep in mind. Make sure that this ratio is less than 1. When you are going antegradally, your A will be slightly bigger, B will be slightly smaller, but always both signals should be good sized, which suggests that you have got a good contact on the annulus. Normally we use 60 degrees centigrade and 40 watts. If you are in the septal area, keep your temperature down, make sure you're ablating in and around 30 watts, and gradually you can go up if required, but start with a lower energy. If you are ablating inside CS, your energy, your watts should be much lower. May start with 15 watts and can gradually go up. Sometimes you might need irrigation. We are not going to other modes. We are sticking to our standard 4 millimeter thermocouple ablation catheter that we use. It is normally 60 degrees centigrade and around 40 watt is what we keep. Make sure that you have got a good signal on your ablation catheter. There should be good contact. Local bipolar signal that you are seeing should be earlier than delta, and it should be fused. Many a times you might have to ablate based on pathway potential, but we are not able to always see a pathway potential, but that is another way that we can look for. So in this case, I'll again blow it up. this case, this was the ablation signal. The top is your MAP catheter. Look at A and V, which was fused, and it definitely, the V was earlier than the delta. Look below at your the unipolar signal. Always, it is always better to have your unipolars on while you ablate. And what you should look on the unipolar is, unipolar should have a QS pattern, which basically means that you are actually at the site of pathway. If all of the impulses are moving away from it. So that is what we are looking at. So a QS on unipolar, a fuse signal, V preceding the delta here in this case, and that is what was the site. So here again, let's look at what is happening. So this is the first beat. Here we have started our energy. The first beat, excited, pre-excited, and here by the fourth beat, A and V has separated, and you get both A and V separated. So this is the site where if you are able to get a separation within 6 seconds, most likely that this is on a long run going to be a successful ablation. The chances of recurrence are much lesser if your pathways separate within 6 seconds. Do not continue to ablate at a particular site if you are not able to get a response. If you are not able to show a disappearance of pathway activity, better to again map the site. Make sure you search for another signal, because giving too much of energy in and around an area might actually cause sometimes the pathway to lose activity and may reappear later on. So therefore, we should not ablate for a very long time. If you are not getting a successful ablation, stop there, again map and look for another site. So this is what we always do. Once you have ablated, how do you know that you are successful? Always go ahead and do a V pace. In this case, we remember when we paced the V, there was an eccentric conduction, while after we have ablated, look that this is what we have discussed, that this is called a concentric kind of an activation. Your CS12 is late, your 910 is early, and that is what your activation pattern should be. So this is what from an eccentric we have converted into a concentric pattern of activation. And this was the ECG. There is no evidence of pre-excitation. This is another case that I'd like to discuss. This is let's discuss the signal. This is another case. Again, here, if we look at in this single slide, what are we seeing? If you look on the surface ECG, again, there is a WPW pattern of activation. This is definitely a pre-excitation pattern that we can see. AVF looks negative. V1 R by S is less than 1. So this was a right-sided pathway, and of course, a posterior pathway. But my whole intention here is to show the ablation signal. Let's go. This is CS12. You see the atrial signal, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you have the MAP signal. In the MAP signal, what we are trying to look for is that you have got A and V fused. Looks like one pathway potential, probably, we're not sure, but probably a sharp spiky signal that we see here is probably a pathway potential. Now, both A and V are fused. You got a good size A, good size V, and this is the site again where we ablated in this case. And if you see the first beat going through the accessory pathway, second beat going through the accessory pathway, and subsequently we have got there's a separation, and this was the site where we ablated. You can see the disappearance of pathway conduction. Look on the surface, your 2,3 AVF, which was negative, has become positive. PR has become normalized. So what I'm trying to say is that whenever you are mapping both on the right and on the left, make sure that you have your catheter contact very nicely on the annulus. Your A and V signals, if you're not getting success, stop your ablation there. Look for a good A and a V signal and then restart. This case again, after the ablation, we recheck it by giving an adenosine. Post adenosine, we have shown an AV block. Pathway conduction is not there. Again, a VA, we see again a concentric kind of VA that you see here post ablation. So post ablation, wait for 30 minutes, make sure that you give adenosine, show the pathway conduction is blocked, do a V pacing, and also show a concentric kind of activation. So stable catheter position should be confirmed fluoroscopically, and there should not be change in the amplitude by more than 10% in the next 5 to 10 beats before you ablate. Earliest local atrial activation time, this is when we are mapping an ORT, an orthodromic reentrant tachycardia. In both these cases, we had a pathway conduction, we had ablated during antegrade conduction. So we were trying to find a V which was earlier than the delta. If you have to ablate in an ORT, that is in a concealed pathway, you will have to look for an early A compared to the A on your mapping on the mapping catheter. A should be earlier than the tachy A. So local VA interval during retrograde activation of the bypass tract should be short. It should be 25 to 50 milliseconds. The whole complex should be fused. By fused, we mean that there should be an isoelectric interval of less than 5 seconds. And if you can ablate by seeing a pathway potential, then that is the best thing to do. Now, this was a case where we had ablated while the patient is having a tachycardia. Now, how do we know this is tachycardia? Look on the top. There's a V, we can see, followed by that an A. Look at this A pattern. This is A, which is again 1-2 is early, whereas 9-2 is 9-10 is late. His A is also late. So basically, this is again an eccentric kind of activation going on. So this is again a left-sided pathway, and on the mapping catheter, what we're looking at a fused VA. And what are we trying to look here? We are trying to find our mapping catheter A, which should be earlier than the A in the CS. So this is what this is how you should be mapping. And here again, after the third beat, we see that V and A separate. So here, this was an ORT where we are trying to map an early A for ablation. And again, this was an antegrade approach where we had gone through transeptal puncture. Post-adenosine in a pathway which is concealed, showing an antegrade AV block is not of much help. Always remember, these cases you will have to show after ablation that post-adenosine there is either no VA or a VA which is concentric. So that is what we're trying to show here. Antegrade, of course, there was no pathway conduction here, so it was AV block, whereas retrogradely we are able to show that there was no VA conduction. So I'll end my talk here. Thank you.
Thank you for a very case-based discussion, which is also good sometimes. And so I think the key takeaway points here are to when you use mapping, you use both bipolar and unipolar signals, and both proximal and distal bipolars. Distal bipolar recorded from the distal 2 electrodes, and proximal bipolar recorded from the proximal 2 electrodes. And also use unipolar, if possible, from both distal and from the proximal electrode. So this and the unipolar proximal distal, of course, unipolar is from unipolar 1 and from unipolar from the electrode number 2. Now on bipolar, like we discussed, don't only go by fusion and local VA or AV intervals, but look for the earliest V in relation to the delta wave onset. And look always for a pathway potential. So because when you can see a pathway potential, it really heightens the chance of success. For unipolars, start using them from the beginning because you'll get used to what kind of patterns to look for. And sometimes bipolar looks very similar in 2 locations, but you have a very small R in one place in the unipolar and don't have it in the other place. And you know clearly that that is the place to go. And like what Dr. Jackman teaches, it's useful to have unipolars both from the most distal and from the proximal electrode, because when you see a potential on the bipolar signal, you see a pathway potential on bipolar signal, you might still see that on the unipolar, it is recorded from the proximal and not from the distal. And then you know that you have to pull your catheter back a little proximally. So it can help you more correctly localize where exactly the pathway is in relation to the last 2 electrodes. So with that, I think it was a very good session. I'll ask Dr. Ashish to give any closing comments. And
sure, I think we by and large discussed the left-sided pathways, which I think for every beginner is a little simple to ablate. In a pre-excitation situations, you are mapping the ventricular end of the pathway, and that's obviously again a little easy. To map the concealed accessory pathways during the tachycardia or during ventricular pacing and localize the A and accurately map is probably the next step. And the right side pathways get a little more difficult because you don't have that elegant CS-like catheter in place where you can precisely map. You have to rely entirely on your ability to move the ablation catheter or your mapping catheter along the tricuspid annulus, where it tends to fall on either side of the annulus in the atrium and the ventricle. The more lateral the pathway is, there also again right-sided septal pathways could be slightly simpler, whereas free wall pathways, the mapping and the stability of the catheter is a little challenge, and you often require long sheets to achieve that kind of a stability. So I think all in all, one doesn't complete the entire exercise of axillary pathways in 1.5 hours. But many of you who have access to EP in your own departments would probably be participating in those procedures with little more insights after today's session. And those who probably do not have that regular access would probably be feeling interested to learn EP now from the textbooks, and maybe later think of doing some fellowship. So I think that's the whole idea of having these HRS sessions, to stimulate the postgraduates to look at EP also as something to learn. Sure. So I'll once again not hold you too long back on a Sunday, but I'll not sign off before thanking the whole Kolkata group, Deva and Suchit, the seniors in the group.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
All the efforts to make the group and design a program and then execute it wonderfully. And of course, the senior professors of the country, Professor Dr. Dwivedi and Professor Dr. Selvaraj, from, I think you all have benefited from their experience and very succinct remarks. Let me sign off. The next session will come on 7th of February, and we'll announce more about it soon. Thanks, Dr. Dwivedi. Thanks, Dr. Selvaraj.
Thank you, sir.
The whole call.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Have a good